Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about the Skaven in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. The Skaven are one of the best races in the game, be it in terms of variety of legendary lords, campaign dynamics, unit roster. Skaven just work very well, though they could always be improved, as can many other races that do work well in the context of Warhammer 3. Hopefully they will be adding Tankwell, and when they do add Tankwell, they could give the Skaven a bit of an update, because, as I said, they could use it. So, when we're looking at the Skaven in the game, one of the things I would say that CA should improve on is the right situation, because you look at the Scheme of Doom, you look at the Pestilence scheme, the 13th scheme, the Dominating scheme. The cooldown of these schemes, as well as their duration, can absolutely leave something to be desired given the pace that we're playing campaigns on. I would also argue that things like plagues and undercities could themselves also be further updated, further improved. Because the problem with undercities is that it's very slow as a mechanic, and realistically, by the time you actually do get the critical mass of them, you might just as well conquer the territory. You can use undercities to expand in one direction with them, and then expand with your armies in an opposite direction, but it's not exactly a thrilling mechanic, I would say. One of the benefits, chief benefits really for the Skaven, is the wide variety of climates that they have. This is one of the things that makes their campaign so much better, because it gives them a playground around the map to deal with. And that is honestly awesome, because Skaven do benefit significantly from it. Regardless of which legendary lord you're playing, you are going to have a huge toolbox and a wide variety of choices to make in a campaign. Of course, the obvious things that could be improved are things like the research tree, unit tiers, building tiers, economy. Those things could be updated. Skaven do have a good economy, but it also has its drawbacks. So some rebalancing, I would say, would be in order. For instance, let's consider the food situation that Skaven have. Early on in a campaign, it's a very limiting factor, because you only have so much food capacity. But eventually in a campaign, you will just end up to the point of having so much food you kind of don't really care about it. Of course, the Skaven do pay the price of taking over settlements with food, because they can't take settlement, except from under Skaven. They can't take settlements except at tier 1 unless they're spending food on it. It's a bit of an imbalanced situation, because again, you can use food to get settlements all the way to tier 5. It is a lot of food in that case. But even if you get it to, say, tier 3, and then get other settlements, tier 2 in a province, you're going to have a good amount of growth. You're going to have a good amount of potential. It's only later on in a campaign that it might not be so worthwhile. But even then, you have so many high-level settlements, and you have a good amount of growth as the Skaven that you kind of don't really care too much about it. And that is one of the problems that Skaven do have, that kind of balancing act. They can be ridiculously powerful or ridiculously weak. There is no middle ground with Skaven. I suppose that is very fitting for them as a race. One of the problems they do have as a race is the fact that two region provinces are not really worth it for them. Not just from the perspective of growth, but also economic limitations. Because the way the Skaven economy is balanced right now, it's based around the idea of income modifiers. So every Skaven building produces a certain level of income. Infrastructure buildings produce more, military buildings less. But the way you generate income in a Skaven campaign is you rely on arcane generators in order to really make your province worthwhile. This does increase the income province-wide, but the drawback is it makes smaller provinces with fewer regions not worth it as much. On the flip side, Skaven can generate a ridiculous amount of money when you do factor in those kind of income modifiers that they do have. So that is one of the problems I would say they have as a race, that kind of balancing aspect that should be handled better within the context of a Warhammer free campaign. Furthermore, the way Skaven campaigns do work, you end up having a problem due to the province situation with Ikeclaw and with Frata and Clean. Because Skaven do need space to grow, but you look at Help It, you look at Skaven Blight, unless you're abusing the food mechanic to get them to a high level early on in a campaign, and you can, by the way, but unless you're abusing that, you will just end up in a situation where those kind of single region provinces fall behind. Basically, what I'm saying is either the Help It and Skaven Blight main structures need to produce much more growth to make up for the lack of other regions that help with growth, or they need to be part of provinces with multiple settlements, which they are not right now. One of the things I like about the Old World campaign mod is that it does put Skaven Blight, for instance, in a proper province, and Help It is just hilarious. The 9 levels of hell. But it is a limiting factor for 2 of the coolest legendary lords in the game, which are both Ikeclaw and Frot. From a mechanics perspective, certainly Frot can be ridiculous regardless, but it's just a bit of that level of annoyance that you do have. I think, like, when you're looking at places like Skaven Blight, Karazakrak, Help It, Kislev City, Prague, Erengrad, they should not be falling behind to a random province just because the random province has 4 regions in it. That would be my perspective. Besides that, though, what is the kind of issue that we do have with the Skaven? And I would say one big issue, besides how they are affected by the bad design of Immortal Empires. Well, the problem is infantry. So Skaven have a lot of monstrous units, they have a lot of support units, they have a lot of artillery ranges, you name it. They have it. Magic, etc. They do have it. The one thing Skaven do lack is good, solid infantry lines. Because yes, you do have Warp Grinders, but they're more of a support melee infantry unit. And really, they're just there to withstand certain charges or, you know, just freeze the enemy so other people shoot them down. Things like Warp Quake and Seismic Snare. Also, they're a specialist unit that's really good at breaking down walls. That's the main purpose of Warp Grinders. But the problem is with Skaven Slaves and Clan Rats and even Storm Vermin. So I understand the idea that except Storm Vermin, Clan Rats and Skaven Slaves should be disposable. That's how Skaven work. But the problem is that's not how it functions in the context of a Warhammer free campaign. Yes, Clan Rats and Skaven Slaves are easy to recruit. They're cheap to recruit. They're not expensive in any way, shape, or form. The issue that we do have in the context of a campaign, if we look at the situation, is that they still take a recruitment slot, and they also aren't necessarily as cheap as you might think. I mean, you compare a Night Runner or a Warp Fire Thrower, which is, by the way, like, those are much, much better units than either Skaven Slaves or Clan Rats, and then you just kind of realize, would I rather have a Night Runner or a Guttural Runner, or would I rather have a Clan Rat with Spears? Even if you can reduce, and you can reduce the upkeep, the fact is, these guys are not great line holders. Now, this is not necessarily a problem in vast majority of cases for Skaven, because they do have that supreme range power and a lot of tools in their kit that they can work with. But just not having any kind of disposable infantry as the quote-unquote disposable infantry faction that you should have is a bit jarring. So what I would say Creative Assembly should do with Clan Rats and Skaven Slaves, well, what they've done for Hobgoblins and even Bretonnian Peasants. Because what they've done for those is that they gave them a specific trait so that their leadership doesn't affect the leadership of your higher-end units. And in the case of Skaven, it shouldn't. Like, who cares? I don't think Skaven care about the deaths of their fellows whatsoever. Oh, 1,000 Skaven slaves died. 2,000 more? Coming right up. That's basically how the Skaven operate. But on top of that, they could really benefit from a WoW-style army. Because you look at the Greenskins, they get a WoW army. They declare WoW, all their armies have an additional army to them. Okay. Now, I did always find that kind of mechanic a bit silly, but it would surprisingly work well. Like, what Skaven should have is beyond their regular armies, which should have higher end units in them. So you should only recruit like clan rats with spears. You should only and higher in them. Like, limit what kind of units you can recruit for the main army. Make sure every campaign does start with the ability of recruiting those, which is not really a big deal. Maybe, you know, change some unit tiers around, all that kind of stuff. Maybe gutter runners should, or night runners and clan rats with spears should be available at tier 1, because Empire spearmen with shields are a tier 1 unit now. Make those available from tier 1 barracks, but instead have every Skaven main army have a second army attached to it permanently. But you can only throw in things like clan rats and Skaven slaves, and maybe the size of that army depends on your main army, with different costs of recruitment and upkeep, because, yeah, who's gonna care about slaves? Like, that's the thing that I think would work with Skaven. They have the elite power dynamic of units done well, but what they lack is the Swarm faction. Warhammer 2 was a bit different in this respect, but because the supply lines are not, why would you recruit clan rats and Skaven slaves? You wouldn't. There's very few benefits. There's a lot of downsides from a leadership perspective, the way battles play out. So we need that differentiation in leadership, and we also need that differentiation between proper Skaven units and units that you just are willing to throw to just, you know, fire everything while they're engaged in melee. That's a very Skaven thing. Also, we could talk about line of sight situations, how rattling gunners should be willing to fire behind their own ranks. I mean, Empire, maybe not. You probably wouldn't want to hit your own troops, but Skaven absolutely should. I understand the concept of friendly fire and the problems it had, but this was actually a case where CA had a period of time in Warhammer 3 even where gunner units could fire through other units, and then people were like, this is broken. And then they just pulled that back completely and made it even worse made it far worse, and actually downgraded from what it was in Warhammer 2. They have improved it since then, but still just problems. There are mods that do it. That's one thing Skaven, of all races in the game, also Vampire Coast, because who cares if you're shooting your own vampires? Control your troops, boys and girls. That's all I'm going to say. So those kind of issues, it's more issues about like inherent limitations of Warhammer 3 than the race, and I think that's telling about how the Skaven do work. They're a great race, they're just limited because of X. Hopefully they do get better, though they are still in a really good spot. Kurtis signing out.